though.
All right, let's just, otherwise I'll just stand here.
Okay. I will let you put that on. I'll let everybody know that this is Michael Belton. He's over here from Optiv. He's the VP of Applied Research. I don't know. That sounds pretty cool. He said he gets to wear a suit sometimes, I suppose. Yeah. But, yeah, he's in from Wisconsin, and he's going to chat at you for a few minutes.
Yeah. There you go. All right. Thank you. So, hi, everybody. I know everybody's having lunch and coming in, so just kind of go slow here a little bit at the beginning, kind of let people filter in if they want. So my talk, I think is different from what I put in the program, but basically it's applied security lessons, right, an adversarial perspective. So what I'm doing with this talk is really, this is meant to sort of be fun and informative. We're basically poking fun at other people's mistakes and trying to learn from them a little bit. Because no good talk in 2017 doesn't talk about IoT at some point. At the very end, I'll kind of tie in some of those topics. But away we go. So, you come to these conferences. I've been going to a lot of conferences. My first DEF CON was DEF CON 6, and I've been going to a lot of conferences since then. So whenever someone stands up, the first thing I like to know is, who is this person? What do they actually do and know, and why should I listen to them? So I'm not sure I can convince you to listen to me, but here's some of my credentials. I've been doing this for just over 20 years. Started in the ISP world, the dial-up modem ISP world. We did some secure services and things for companies at that level, but what that really taught me and got me interested in InfoSec specifically beyond college and kind of hacking around on SunOS boxes and whatnot was really this is mid-90s, InfoSec and hacking and attacking networks and all of that was pretty new, and it was pretty Wild West and a lot of fun. So I saw a lot of interesting things, and it really motivated me to not only up my chops on what it means to be a security person, but also to pursue it as a career and to try and understand how I can help others. So I spent so I did the ISP thing for a while. We sold that. I had founded it. We sold that, and I went into a military environment doing offensive and defensive computing, Fort Gordon, Fort McCoy. And that was early 2000s, well, right around 9/11. 9/11 happened while I was doing that work. So that was, an interesting time also because you're in a military environment, and this whole cyber war concept, whether you like the word cyber or not, right? It's a useful communication tool. So that stuff has been going on since the late 90s, right? Major cyber wars and all those things, the Chinese aggression and American aggression and all of that, hackback concepts, all of these things have been around for a very long time. So I did that, then I got into consulting, really kind of trying to help other companies make themselves better, try and apply some of these experiences. So I've been consulting for quite a while, done a lot of technical testing, done a lot of process and procedure guidance, governance kind of stuff, program development. And at the end of the day, I'm a terrible golfer. So I'm a VP, but I can't golf. So take that for what it's worth. Thank you. So if I could just take a couple of minutes here just to kind of get to know you guys a little bit. How many in the house are pen testers here? Anybody? All right, a few. I expected more. That's cool. Do a lot of people work for companies, security red teams, that kind of thing, or none? Or a lot of you are like me. You go to these conferences and someone asks what you do, and you're like, I'm not going to tell you anything. I'm not going to raise my hand. So that's cool too. Last question, though, kind of on the IoT tie-in. Do any of you guys work for a company that creates some sort of connected, smart type technology? All right, a few more of those. More of those than pen testers. Interesting. All right, cool. Well, hopefully this will have something for everybody to think about a little bit. So, what are we talking about and why are we talking about it? As I said in the beginning, the basic goal for this talk is really to try and learn from other people's mistakes. Put private pile up on a stand there and make everybody else do push-ups, and we'll try and figure out what went wrong. But really what this is a bunch of war stories from penetration tests or incident response that I've been a part of. I have 3 of them, and then talk a little bit about IoT at the end. But these are actual, real things that happened in the real world, paid to do them by customers. And I chose them because, to me, they represented some interesting security challenges. If you're an incident responder, I guess I didn't ask that. Anybody do incident response? Forensics? All right, a few more of those. Cool. So if you're in that kind of work, this is sort of, this is the fun part for me about incident response, is you go in, it's black box, you really are just kind of airdropped in with a parachute, and you know, here's some symptoms and figure out what's going on. So that's kind of the format for this whole thing. So at this point I'd like to talk just take a break here and let's just talk a little bit about why all of these things are happening, right? What is the motivation of your adversary? And that's sort of the key talk, right? The adversarial perspective, I think, is one of the important things to really understand when you're trying to unravel these Gordian knots of an incident or whatever it is. So I like to kind of look at it on a variety of on a spectrum with a variety of personalities. At one end of the spectrum, you have sort of the hobbyist, right? And for those of you that work for companies that make a smart connected device, this is probably one of your primary adversaries. And that's true because they're not necessarily trying to be malicious, but what they are trying to do is, I have a bunch of Linux boxes in my house or BSD boxes, wherever they are. They're running XBMC and a variety of other stuff, and I got all this cool stuff happening in my home. And now I bought this silly thermostat, and it has a TCP/IP stack, and I want to talk to it. And that's the pure motivation right there. I don't want to destroy your brand. I don't want to, start a botnet or anything else. I really just kind of want to make this integrated with my home setup. So I start taking it apart, right? Start taking the firmware apart, start looking for ways to integrate with an API or to integrate with, some other shell type access or whatever you have. And I'm maybe gonna be so into it that I start a blog or I start a forum and other people who are into it start to gather around that thing. Right, and together we sort of form this hacking community that's focused on your device, your product, for those that work for those companies. On the far other end of the spectrum is the nation-state actor. So a lot is said about nation-state actors and scary men in masks and all this good stuff. But at the end of the day, that is a real thing, right? The idea that nation-states are buying your product, if it's a smart building product or whatever it is, or they're taking apart Windows or they're taking apart Android or whatever it is, right? There is a nation-state sponsored group of actors that are actively trying to take apart these technologies, build up a big catalog of O-days, and sit on them and use them for tactical purposes. So that's a very real thing. We can Hollywood the heck out of it and turn it into something else. But at the end of the day, that's real, right? So one end of the spectrum, kind of a harmless hacker person who may stumble onto something. On the other end, the nation state who is highly focused on stumbling onto things. And then in the middle of that spectrum, you have a variety of fraud actors, criminal actors, sort of motivated by selling personal data or gathering all of the cameras that they can, through Shodan or whatever their goals are. But I think it's important to sort of step back, whether you're on the offensive side of the equation or the defensive side of the equation for your company. I think it's important to step back and understand why all of these things are happening. It's really cool to get down in the weeds and start to figure out exactly what is happening. But I think it's just important to understand why it's happening, and that's where some of these motivations I think are important to ponder. So. Also, just a quick note, so I'm going to start some of this, but, if you have a question, if you have a comment, just shout it out. Ideally we'll kind of have a conversation, but I know that rarely works in an audience this size. So my first case here is the moving mouse. So we start off with some observations. Hi, everybody. So here's some observations. You get this is one of those things, you get a call, 5 o'clock on a Friday kind of thing, right? And, dear Bob, everything is blowing up in our network. Here's some things we can tell you. So remote control of an endpoint. That's fairly straightforward. Remote control of an endpoint means that they're not actually doing it. The mouse starts moving, whatever it does. The moving mouse, the name of the thing should sort of give you a clue as to where we're going here. They had a bunch of log entries that indicated login failures. So this is not just on the single workstation or a couple of workstations. This is, this is across the network. This is databases and all kinds of things. So they're getting notifications from their network management systems about up and down servers, and these are core servers. So randomly, core servers are going up and down. They're coming back fine, and they're going back into production mode just fine, but for some reason they're rebooting. You have various users reporting network connectivity issues. So I can't get to the system, or I can't get to the public internet, or I can't get to whatever it is. I can't get to email. So you're starting to get these sporadic calls across the organization. And I'm sorry, I guess it helps a little bit to sort of define the organization. What we're talking about here is a company that's worth about net revenue is, I think, 200 to 300 million, somewhere in that range. They have, I think they had 400 to 500 employees, if I remember correctly. So they have quite a few systems. But, if you work for a company that's about that size or smaller, you're probably familiar with the staffing scenario, right? So they were talking about an IT team that's very small. They're incredibly overtaxed. So they're working their butts off every day just to keep the systems running and to build new systems, business systems, that respond to what the business needs. And information security is like cool. It's a hobby for this guy or that guy, and he's really into Kali or whatever it is. Back in this time it was Backtrack. But they don't have like a formal InfoSec capability. They don't have a formal InfoSec and incident response sort of capability. So it's really just a bunch of, for lack of a better term, a bunch of alpha geeks in a room who are really good at making the computers work. And so they're starting to get these calls, right? They have some security background, but not a ton. So some of the users are calling and saying that to pick up, that new software has been installed on their machine. They haven't seen it before. There's a bunch of seats over here, if you guys want to stand or not, but there are some seats over here if you want to fill in. Anyways, a large number of user accounts start to get locked out. So right off the bat, there's a lot of potential. Does anybody take a stab? I mean, what would you, if you care to be brave enough to raise your hand, what do you think this might be? All right, post-lunch blues. I thought I was a hand, but it was adjusting the glasses. Darn it. All right. So, I mean, the obvious ones, right? A rat got installed on this thing. Not the mouse type, but a real rat. Or human error, right? The users are idiots. Let's just put it out there. And every network that I've ever designed would be perfectly secure if it had no users, but we got to deal with that. So maybe it was just human error. Maybe there's just some technical malfunction, right? Router needs to be rebooted. That's why we can explain the network connectivity and the up-down servers, right? Maybe the NMS just can't see them. The servers are perfectly fine. The NMS is lying to us. Who knows? So there's a lot of different potentials. And so we worked through that, right? We showed up, we sat down with their team, and we worked through that. What could this be? What could that be? And one of the big things in an incident response like this is really you wind up fighting the ghosts. And the first thing that you need to do is to eliminate the ghosts. So is the NMS system working properly, and can it actually ping everything? Very, very simple troubleshooting problem. But let's work through all of those, right? So no, NMS was fine. The cores really were. We had, they didn't have a good, robust logging system because at this point in time, no one really wanted to do that. Logs cost money, I guess. But, we could go into the servers and you could see the event log, and you could log into Linux boxes and you could see the syslog, and you could see that the things actually did shut down, and this was real, right? So we could define what was reality and what was pretend, and what were the factors involved. And so then, okay, let's start to talk to the users. We've sort of eliminated what we think any technical problems could be. Let's start to talk to the end users. So we did that. And it was kind of interesting. We found one user, we just kind of call her patient zero, of course. I I guess the other thing to know at this point is small banking type operation, as a financial services operation. So this was quite a while ago, like I said. So this was the days when you could Google bomb. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but that was when you could really trick Google into thinking you were a high value site, and associated by the pigeon rank and the number of links and all that good stuff. So it was easy to trick Google into thinking that you were something that should be at the top of their search results, and that was fun times. So what had happened was we talked to this the woman that answered the phone, sort of patient zero. Again, through our technical analysis, we kind of deduced it down to this person. And we had a conversation with her, and she was very intimidated and very scared about, what the questions we were asking and all that. So you get through that psychological problem, and you start to work towards a goal of just trying to understand, right? Your job's not in jeopardy. We're just trying to understand this stuff. So she said that she had received a call. Oh, we also had some event logs from her system that showed us this maybe had been going on for 2 to 3 weeks. So she said that she had taken a call. We narrowed it down to a single day. She had taken a call. A person called her and told her that the institution she was working for was running a special on bonds, right? Financial bonds. And could she give them more information? Of course, she had no idea what they were talking about. Classic social engineer. And they convinced her to go to Google and search for this thing. And they had Google bombed the word bonds in Google. And so she went there. He said, it'll be the first link. She clicked on it. There you go. Now you've got remote install. Also, remember, this is quite a while ago. I'm talking about Google bombing. It's also the time when IE was the ultimate place to run remote exploits. And that's exactly what happened. So the person had socialed her. They had Google bombed. So this wasn't child's play. Turned out, after working with authorities and some other things, turned out this was actually fairly widespread. They were doing this to a number of targeted smaller institutions about this size, and were profiting heavily from it. So anyways, they called her up. They convinced her to go to their link. They attacked IE. They got remote code. They're talking back to it. And it turned out to be a serious incident. But there were a few things that I think are worth highlighting. One, they had wireless keyboards and wireless mouse. This is the moving mouse part. Moving mice, or wireless mice, pardon me. So for whatever reason, they had sort of become accustomed to this idea of crosstalk between these devices. So, I'm sitting here and there's a teller 3 down and I move my mouse and her screen moves. And they had just sort of convinced themselves that this was a thing. Who knows? Maybe it was a thing for them. But in this case, it wasn't a thing for them. It was actually the adversary moving the mouse. But they had completely written this off as normal behavior because they suspected the wireless mice and wireless keyboards were the culprit. Even when it did things, and as we started to have this discussion with her, even as it did things like pop open a command prompt and type commands. Seems normal, right? But so these things happened, and multiple people admitted that they saw this, but they presumed that was just something that was normal. So they never reported it. Again, the end users, man, they're just out to make our lives hell. But they didn't report this, and they didn't talk about it, and so no one knew that this was going on. And so anyways, there were a couple other issues like that. There was a printer problem and some other things that they had just sort of reasoned off. But here again, this thing lived in this financial network for 3 weeks. And it did cool things like pop open a command prompt and try and talk to Fiserv, if you're familiar with what Fiserv is, and those sorts of things. Didn't go reported. The institution, when they figured it out, were totally overwhelmed, right? The IT staff was totally overwhelmed to try and figure out what it was. And eventually, like I said, working with authorities and some other things, we had resolved that this was actually a group that was actively doing this, not just towards a single institution, but across a number of institutions that were highly targeted based on their size and their perceived connections to the financial network. So, all right, so we worked for the first one, had 0 participation. That's totally cool. But yes, please. Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's your classic defense. The question was, did we have any recommendations for this organization moving forward? And the answer is yes, of course. So effectively, right, the first and foremost problem was you need to have a special security focus, and you need to pay for that, right? You've now lost a very large sum of money to them, right? Maybe not to Chase or whoever, but to them, you lost a very large sum of money, and you've exposed all these other financial networks, so now your business partners hate you. Invest in a security person who just focuses on that. But then beyond that, right, re-architect your networks a little bit, and this is a 3-year plan kind of thing, but this is the days when segmentation was, we need a big /24, and that's the way it is. So segmentation, employee awareness training, right, security awareness training, all of those good defense in depth kind of things. But it was basically, we're a small organization with a very, very immature information security capability, and we need to be a small organization with a better information security capability, and that involves more investment than they've made. So it was a variety of those classical controls, right? Policy and procedure, they didn't have anything like that, right? They had some basic things that were required by the financial community, but they weren't robust. Like any other organization, they were in place, they were on paper, but reality was completely and totally different, right? People didn't actually follow these rules or adhere to them in any way. It was just, you could convince an auditor that you're doing it. So it was that sort of thing. And you had to move from convincing the auditor to actually being good at information security. Yeah. Thanks for the question. All right. Lessons. Perfect lead in for that. Network-based detection capability, well-tuned log analysis and notification. That's huge, right? Your eyes and ears. Organizations still completely fail at this. Know what your systems are doing and when they're doing them. Better awareness, better incident response capability. Have some sense of, if I show up and I need to know how are these systems connected, actually have network maps for me, those sorts of things. All right. So next one. The next one is called the Weary Traveler. So some simple observations. Shipping operations are interrupted by IT outages. This organization had a partnership with Walmart. If any of you work at companies that have partnerships with Walmart and have to deliver a product, they have very, very strict guidelines on when things are meant to be shipped, when they're supposed to be received, and if you violate those, there's financial penalties and all kinds of stuff. So, shipping operations that are interrupted, this is a huge oh crap moment for this organization because they're thinking about these dollars that are going out the door. First notification of the outage occurs at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. So I'm in Central Time Zone normally. I'm in Wisconsin. And this was a Midwest-based company, so it's 4:30. All of a sudden, everything starts to hit the fan. Core servers are affected, many endpoints, unidentified processes in memory, all the good classic hits here. And the in-house staff has, of course, exhausted all the options that they have. So let's talk about potentials, right? Classic things. We have a virus. First and foremost. We have some sort of malware running on the network, and it is, it is causing systems to be corrupted and just crash. This was not an issue where there was a lot of network connectivity or a lot of other things where you're seeing network outages or things like that. This was really more focused on systems were having problems. So we start to do the investigation. It's all the classic things. You start to bring a server up in an isolated setting, go through memory, try and understand what's going on, run all the tools you have, do memory dumps and start to take apart, reverse engineer that, bin walk it, do all those fun things. But basically try and understand, here's a system that's having a failure. Let's understand what the failure is and figure out where it came from. So we were working with antivirus vendors. I was working at a large consultancy at the time, and we had connections to all the major antivirus vendors and malware endpoint protection system vendors. So we're taking this apart. We're submitting this into their bug identification systems. Nothing's coming out, and no one had seen this before. So we identified that there was a real bug. We identified that it was actually a thing running in memory. And we also identified that none of the none of the software vendors that we knew knew what this thing was. So at this point, our logical conclusion is we're dealing with an O-Day. And so, okay, how does this happen? Well, in this one, we kind of took all of the systems apart and started to figure out, you basically shut everything down and started to figure out one by one how this came in, using some very rudimentary network logging and some syslogging and the event viewer in Windows and all that good stuff. So what we had discovered was a laptop had recently been reintroduced to the network. The laptop had been out traveling the world. In particular, this manufacturer was dealing with new partners in China. And the salesperson, the sales team actually, was over there and connected to a number of networks in China. And along the way, they had picked up, and I'm not trying to bash the Chinese or anything, it's just, this is the world we live in, right? So they had plugged into a bunch of untrusted networks with this trusted network asset. They picked up a bug. They brought it back. When they got back to the States and logged in and started to sync up all their sales data, this guy decided to hop SMB shares, and other systems started to pick it up from SMB. So it was a custom variant of a known malware family. But again, none of the vendors that we worked with at the time could identify it, even though it came from a known malware family. The timing was pretty clearly deliberate. We could show remote access, we could show remote control, and we could show initiation of specific actions, so execution of a binary and different activities like that indicated pretty heavily, gave us a high degree of confidence that there was something coordinated and targeted about this. At the end of the day, we were able to, so let's go on. At the end of the day, we were able to at least identify it, right? We worked with the chosen endpoint protection vendor of this organization. They quickly created a signature. We were able to go through and pull, back up from tape what we had. We were able to identify a timeline for this, so we were fairly confident that the tapes were clean at a certain point. So we were able to back up from tape, and we were able to update with this new signature by hand, right? Off the network, going one by hand, bring these systems back up into a trusted state, put them back on the network, and start to move on with life. But it was a very intensive weekend. It was all done in 3 or 4 days. We're talking about a system, our company that had 200 or 300 systems, pretty small. But for them, this was a business-ending event, right? If they could not ship products, they could not make money, and they put not only their revenue stream at risk, but their business relationships and their partnerships were at risk as well. So for them, this is a potential business-ending event. So lessons from this: if you have international sales forces, if you have international employees, understand where they're working as an organization who's trying to develop a risk assessment and try and develop a plan around this. Effectively, what you want to do is rank by risk the areas where people will be working, and understand what systems are going to be going to those areas, so that you can have a quarantining period and effectively a cleansing process as part of that. What we had recommended to this organization was, when you have individuals going to some of these hot spots, send them with a machine that's wiped from the beginning and will be wiped at the end. And then all you're worrying about is transferring the data that they need. So that's really a matter of, isolating that system as part of a quarantining process, copying it over, validating that the data that you've copied over is risk-free, for some value of risk-free, and then, reformat the system and move on. But developing that process, developing that workflow of how do we handle employees who are going to hotspots was really the core lesson. Beyond that, incident response capability and some of these other defense in-depth things. But. All right. So that was that one. Next one here, last one. Wandering Wi-Fi. This one's kind of fun. So this was a small, well, relatively small, about the size of Grand Rapids, city government. And we had been doing a bunch of pen testing for them. We've been doing a bunch of AppSec work for them. So it was a lot of activities going on the internal network. The final set of tests was the most fun. This was go to a public meeting where the mayor is speaking and the city council is there, and try to break in. So you're in a public setting. The team was blending into the crowd. We were all using IRC to communicate and coordinate our actions. But there's 5 of us, and we're positioned all through the crowd. And I think there were 3 people total who knew that we were authorized to do this. Mayor and city council, none of those people were aware of this, just the IT and InfoSec folks. So nobody really knew this. It's a total black box kind of thing. Everyone's connected to an open access point that's operated by the city. Out of the 50 people at the meeting, only 7 of them were authorized as targets, and we were able to use or allowed to use all of the information that we gathered during the external and internal and all that stuff. So pretty classic Wi-Fi problem. What we're able to do is first we had to spend a lot of time just identifying our targets. And so that's just a lot of network traffic analysis, understanding SMB broadcasts and all these other things that Windows likes to spit out, and identifying systems based on known domains and things, other information that we had. But once we had done that, it was really a matter of identifying a way into the system. So this, again, is a little bit of an older story. Not that it's a lot harder to pop Windows boxes, but it was incredibly easy at this time, especially the way this organization had configured their wireless network interfaces, which was effectively wide open. So we had all Windows services exposed and everything else. The one thing that we found that really allowed us to have a good time was the woman who was taking notes for the mayor. So she was documenting the meeting in an official capacity. She was connected to the wireless because her machine had always been, sort of associated with that network, but she had also plugged in, of course, up at the front. So she's sitting at a desk with an actual wired Ethernet connection. She's connected to this open AP. She's running a Windows system. Hilarity ensues. So it, all of the good things that we could do on the internal now we could do through this. Effectively, she's a bridge at this point, right? So we're doing all of those fun things. Lots of comedic value to that. But at the end of the day, move on to lessons here. At the end of the day, right, it was really sort of a core wake-up call for this organization. Nothing new here again, right? Network segmentation at its core. The ability to identify attacks, endpoint system management and attack detection, all those good things. And just standard sort of system security concerns. So at the end of the day, wireless is and always will be an interesting domain for us, right? The crack attack that just came out is clear evidence of that. You have these protocols that have been around forever. We feel that they've been thoroughly audited, and suddenly we learn that they haven't been. So this is all going much faster than I had anticipated, so we'll have some time at the end. So let's talk a little bit about the Internet of Things. This is kind of my last my last foray here. And my friend Daryl Hyland, who I can see sitting out there, will be speaking next about attacking IoT. And I know he has a great talk around this. So let's just talk about the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things, to me, is an interesting thing, right? It's at my position at Optiv for applied research, we focus on these embedded architectures and sort of full stack assessment of these things. So not just, we're focused on the hardware and the device, but really we're looking at the full ecosystem of the product, how it interacts, and what these threats are. And the interesting thing, given that I started this all in the mid-90s and now we're in 2017, is a lot of the old lessons are back. To me, IoT is 1997 all over again, because all of these things that we learned from a Windows system or a Unix system perspective are all out the window, right? Including ridiculous things like, default user creds. But even beyond that, beyond the simple AppSec, NetPen kind of look at it, we're talking about a situation where we have organizations that are producing products that are intended to develop, encourage some sort of data mining for them. And they're being put out in the field, and they're running ridiculously old versions of Linux or Android with ridiculously old libraries and no sense of endpoint protection or cryptography or anything else. So literally, to me, it's sort of like 1997 all over again in a very embedded format, which is kind of interesting. So I'll reference the quote here from Bruce Schneier, if you guys follow his blog or whatever. The Internet of Things will allow for attacks we can't even imagine. So that's a pretty big statement from some guy who's really well known and has been around for a while. So when I think about what Bruce is saying here, to me it kind of boils down to scenarios like this, right, where your refrigerator is attacking your car. And I give this example to clients, and I give this example in other Optiv things that I do. And it sounds funny, but it's very, very realistic, right? Because think about the application stack at the top. At the top, what we're saying is we want to live in a world where I'm driving home and I go past the store and my car knows this and it talks to my refrigerator, and my refrigerator says, hey, you need milk, and my car says, hey, you should stop and get milk because you're out. All right? Very, very simple application. Seems pretty harmless. But think about the level of connectivity required to make that happen. Just that very simple application, right? The trust relationship between my refrigerator and my automobile is now completely and totally in place and expected. The middle layer, which is a cloud, some cloud platform, right, for whatever value of cloud you want to use. But there's some sort of middleware, there's some sort of broker in the middle of all of this who's handling this data and has connectivity into my refrigerator and my car. And what that means, again, going back to Bruce, is we are entering this world where interconnectivity, and I'm not against this in any way. I think these are really cool applications, right? This is Star Trek stuff. I mean, that's kind of cool. But at the end of the day, right, we're rushing into this, and we're rushing into this with the 1997 mentality of information security, and as a result, we're getting things where, all right, I can pop this ridiculously old version of Android on my refrigerator, and now because of that trust relationship, I can talk to the automobile. And because the entertainment system of the automobile isn't properly segmented from the CAN bus, now Charlie Miller shows up and he starts crashing my car into the ditch. We're entering these sort of interesting times where the things that I just talked about, I mean, these are not, rocket surgery type concepts where we have silly users and poor logging mechanisms and terrible visibility into the network and an inability to identify threats, and a variety of other sort of issues related to wireless connectivity and all these other things. But they're all back with a force in this whole IoT concept. So I want to relay one story from my team at Optiv, and we were working on a product. The manufacturer, for those of you who raise your hands, may sympathize with this, but the company they were trying to develop a product. It was a consumer product. It had a very low price point, and they were trying to develop it in the most budget-efficient manner possible. And what the most budget-efficient manner possible translated to was outsourcing a lot of this development work to companies in Asia, and specifically to China, because they have this ridiculously awesome manufacturing prowess. So we're sourcing hardware components from here, we're sourcing software components from here, we're sort of marrying them together in a grand design that we have, and we're trusting that this is all going on. Now, of course, here's the 1997 part. No one at all in this entire process has thought about information security, right? This comes in at the very end. The prototype is on my desk, and someone comes in and says, Mattel or whomever or blah, blah, blah just got popped, and Barbie was saying all sorts of awful things, and it hurt their brand. How are we going to negate this, right? Well, there's the prototype. It's done. So they sent it to us for testing, and my team does a lot of reverse engineering. We do a lot of in-memory analysis. We do a lot of deep end of the pool, as I'll call it, kind of stuff, right? So it's not just, scan it and, typical sort of NetPen or AppSec kind of stuff. This is, let's take the thing apart and let's really understand what it's doing and why it's doing it. So what we found was we discovered an in-memory collector. And it was, we couldn't identify where it was getting its data from, but we could identify that some process in memory was taking information, compressing it, and then encrypting it. And it was living in memory until you shut the thing off, of course. So, so this was kind of interesting. We, tried to trace it through to the kernel as much as possible. We did a lot of analysis to try and understand what this was. But of course, when we're done testing, this is a lesson we learned. When we're done testing, right, you power the thing off. So what we hadn't done, and what we, eventually figured out was, well, let's just leave it on for 2-3 weeks and see what happens. Let's never shut it off. Let's use it like a normal user. And what it turned out was, this collection mechanism, every 2 weeks would reach out to the manufacturer, that produced it and send these blobs of data to them. So, so there's a backdoor. Effectively, what we then led to was we discovered 4 more backdoors. And when the manufacturer went to their supplier and said, hey, what did you do for software security? The supplier's response was astonishing, and it was basically, if you don't tell us that you want these sorts of security controls in the software, we don't build any in. And the same was true for the hardware manufacturer. So effectively what you had was a couple of very advanced backdoor techniques built into the firmware of this device that was in a prototype stage and ready to go to production and be sold for Christmas. So that's one of those 1997 moments as well, right? We can do a lot of things. If you own the source code, then I think your world is different, but it's not radically different, quite frankly. If, in this case, they completely and totally trusted the outsourcing and development of this product to a third party, with them providing just the design and the specs and the expectations. But even if you're not doing that, right, the idea of trusting your hardware, right, eventually you're getting to a component that you didn't make. I don't care if you wrote the source code or not, and whether you're good at writing source code is a totally different topic that we can discuss. But whether you're doing it or not, at some point there's a part of the product that you didn't make and your company doesn't own and you're just a consumer of. And it's sort of interesting to see this whole IoT phenomenon in that the nation state side that we started talking about originally, they're not idiots, right? They figured this out. That at the end of the day, you're buying chipsets from 5 vendors in the world or something like that. So again, it's kind of 1997 all over again in that you have these software stacks and hardware stacks that are largely untrusted. They're consuming our personal information and they're transmitting it all over the place, and they're developing these trust relationships between devices that now have some sort of actuating and kinetic property in the real world. And that is new and brave. So that's one simple example. It's a fairly easy example because we can point to the bad guy and say, well, they should have done this or that or some other thing. But at the end of the day, even if you're creating your own software, I think you need to really go back to some of these core principles of how are we producing software as an organization. Do we have people who are skilled in information security concepts and software security concepts? And most important, are we developing a culture of security? So whether you're running a bunch of Windows boxes or you're building a product, I think the big takeaway from a lot of these lessons to me is you really have to live in a culture of security. And a culture of security isn't just some check boxes. It's really thinking about, I'm doing this, what does that mean to the future? So that might have been a little ranty. I don't know, maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, I don't know. So we'll leave that at that. And with that, I'm out of slides. I'm out of breath. Happy to take any questions or comments or concerns. And if not, yes. Yeah, the statement was, so no one in QA caught this backdoored product. And the answer is no. And the reason is QA people are not security people, right? They're going through and they're saying, does the user interface fail when I do these things, right? What is the consumer experience? That's more what they're focused on. They're not focused on how securely was this developed, and is there a collector living in memory that only squirts out data every 2 weeks, right? That's just not in their realm. I would sort of equate that to the situation with automobile security, right? The National Highway Transportation NHTSA, whatever they are. Sorry. Thank you. They're not equipped to do software testing of automobiles in any way, shape, or form, right? That entire organization is built to crash automobiles into things, do kinetic measurements, and make some understanding of what the car's safety is. But they have zero capabilities as far as software testing goes, right? They don't have the staff for it, they don't have the tooling for it, they don't have the mandate for it. So kind of like the QA department at this organization, the QA department did all of the things that they should do, right? They made sure that the user interface worked properly, and when it crashed, it came back gracefully, and all of those sorts of things. But they didn't expect that they were going to get a really buggy product from a trusted partner. And I think that, you know, like I said, I think the parallel to that is automobile software security and where we're going. You know, if you're familiar with Mudge, right, that's kind of his whole cyber UL concept that he's been kicking around for a couple of years, is how do we build that in? Without ranting too much, I think that's going to be incredibly difficult because of the example I just gave, where you have partner organizations, business partners in foreign countries who are motivated by their government to do these things and compensated by their government to do these things. And so at some point, the ridiculous tidal wave of software will overwhelm any sort of potential to do a cyber UL or something like that. But maybe that's just me. Yes? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. When we tracked where the data was going, to me and to others who were looking at the data, it was clearly state-sponsored, and there's really no other way to just sort of explain what was happening. The vendor themselves, for some of that, I don't even know if they knew that it was in the source code, quite frankly. But the command and communications that I'm talking about was pretty clearly identified as nation-state operated.
And at that point, can I assume that the company that contacted us about software decided not to do that anymore, and then that shipped off the company completely?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So the question was whether the company continued on or dumped the partner. Yes. So they did and they didn't, right? What they did do under our guidance was create a more predictable environment through contract for their expectations, right? Their real failure initially was they didn't set out these goals and objectives for the organization they had subcontracted to. I'm not against subcontracting, whatever, that's totally cool. But you have to set the rules of the road to govern the relationship, and they hadn't done that. And so that was the major failing. The software house is a good software house, They
They're going to discover this no matter what. Even though the client
Absolutely. Well, so part of their process now, right, is much earlier in the stage is to have that software tested properly in the ways that I had just described, right? So that's part of their production process. It's a classic risk mitigation, right? You have a partner, and it's not like they're the only customer of this partner, right? So it's not a matter of, oh, this entity got you, right? It's really a matter of setting these expectations for that partner and then trusting that they can do that, but verifying it through testing. Yeah. But thanks for the input. All right. Anybody else? Sold.